Residents of Dustwell Ridge are no strangers to rumor, but nothing prepared them for the whispers that swept through the streets just before dawn last Tuesday. By the time the sun climbed over the bluffs, the entire town was already buzzing, and speculation brewed thicker than the morning coffee served at the depot. The event at the Lone Lantern Saloon the previous evening, described only in cautious fragments and hesitant tones, was now on the verge of transforming from gossip to full-blown scandal. And at the center of it all stood two people whose paths, according to longtime locals, were never meant to cross so catastrophically. A rancher known for his unwavering code of conduct, and a woman who carried secrets the town had long overlooked. Early reports described the moment with an odd mixture of awe and confusion. One witness, who declined to give a name but admitted to being present when it unfolded, said the air inside the saloon shifted suddenly, like a storm rolling in without warning. The room, usually filled with raucous card games and the thump of boots on old wood, fell silent as the rancher approached the woman. What followed, according to multiple accounts, was not a confrontation in the usual Dustwell Ridge fashion. No gun drawn, no threats exchanged, no drunken outburst to dismiss. Instead, it was a conversation in hushed tones, one that forced every man nearby to stop what he was doing and strain to catch even a single word. What he reportedly said is still a matter of debate. Some claim he asked her what she was hiding. Others swear he told her that her presence in the town was a threat to everyone. One version, admittedly the most dramatic, suggests he already knew something the rest of the town had missed for years, something that had been buried beneath Dustwell Ridge's polite smiles and stiff handshakes. Whatever the truth, witnesses agree on one point. Her response changed everything. "That is forbidden," she whispered. The words were faint, but not faint enough to erase the fear quivering beneath them. What she meant remains unclear, and perhaps that's what has kept the town restless ever since. Forbidden knowledge? Forbidden history? Forbidden action? In a place where even the sheriff struggles to keep order, the idea that something deeper, something prohibited by law, tradition, or worse, might be unfolding was enough to jolt the community awake. What makes the incident even more unsettling is the rancher's reaction. Known widely for his steady temperament and ironclad restraint, he was shaken by her words in a way that left witnesses unnerved. One person described his expression as a man reading his own obituary, while another insisted she saw him take a step back, visibly rattled, as if the whispered phrase carried some spiritual or moral weight he had not anticipated. According to those closest to him, the rancher has always prided himself on being unflappable. He is the man who stares down a rattlesnake before breakfast and negotiates land disputes with the calm of a preacher. But that night, he appeared shaken to his core. The content of their conversation remained sealed behind walls of speculation and selective memory. Several patrons of the saloon have offered to share what they heard, but their accounts contradict one another enough to raise suspicion. Some details, small inconsistencies, odd gaps, suggest that certain people may be withholding information either out of fear or loyalty. Dustwell Ridge has always been a place where alliances run deep, and some residents would sooner take secrets to the grave than become a source of trouble. According to a preliminary statement from the sheriff's office, there is currently no official investigation into the incident, though deputies have been instructed to remain attentive to any unusual activity connected to the event. This vague directive has only fueled public curiosity, especially since the sheriff himself has refused to comment beyond a brief remark. Not everything whispered in this town is meant for the daylight. Whether this statement was meant to calm the public or warn them remains a matter of interpretation. The woman at the center of the controversy, who arrived in Dustwell Ridge only 6 weeks ago, has also become a figure of intense scrutiny. Her background is foggy at best, consisting of a few handwritten travel notes in the boarding house ledger, a couple of sightings at local merchants, and one mention in the mail registry that lists her as passing through. She has not offered an explanation for her presence in the town, and until the incident in the saloon, no one seemed interested in asking. Now, however, her sudden rise to infamy has made her the most watched figure in the settlement, with some locals claiming she carries documents, maps, or warnings related to matters beyond the region that is for the rancher. His silence since the incident has only made matters worse. Friends claim he has become withdrawn, spending long hours near the edge of his property and avoiding the usual gatherings. Statements from his ranch hands describe him as distracted and lost in thought, though none report seeing signs of aggression or panic, only a deep, unsettling concentration, as if he is preparing for something he cannot yet articulate. A few believe he is protecting the town from something he alone understands. Others fear he may be entangled in something far larger than Dustwell Ridge can imagine. What truly happened inside the Lone Lantern Saloon still hangs like a storm cloud over the settlement. Residents check over their shoulders more frequently. Conversations hush when strangers pass. Even the local trader reported a recent surge in purchases of supplies that could be intended for emergencies: lantern oil, rope, dried meat, and ammunition. All signs suggest the community senses something brewing, though no one dares speak it aloud. The phrase itself, asterisk that is forbidden, asterisk, has become the refrain of the week, repeated in whispers around wells, storefronts, and church pews. The ambiguity of the statement is what terrifies many. Forbidden by whom? Forbidden why? Forbidden to protect the town or to hide something from it? As long as the answers remain elusive, Dustwell Ridge finds itself gripped by a tension that refuses to loosen. If there is one certainty, it is this: the rancher understood something in those whispered words, something heavy enough to shake a man built on composure and principle. And whatever that revelation was, the ripples of it continue to disturb the dusty streets and wooden walls of Dustwell Ridge, suggesting that the town may soon be forced to confront a truth long buried and long feared. Authorities across the region are now working to piece together the chain of events that followed the mysterious exchange between the rancher and the woman whose quiet warning, asterisk, that is forbidden, asterisk, sparked an upheaval far greater than anyone in the settlement could have expected. In interviews with local residents, officials, and those familiar with the rancher's past, a picture is emerging of a man who had long walked a razor-thin line between respect and suspicion, between being relied upon and being feared. What no one living in the town anticipated, however, was that a single whispered reminder of an old law, wrapped in secrecy and burdened by generations of silence, would be enough to unravel the fragile balance of power that had held the community together for decades. According to town records and accounts of elders, the forbidden rule referred to by the woman connects to an obscure agreement drafted more than 30 years earlier, one that was only spoken of in cautious tones and often dismissed by younger residents as nothing more than a tale used to frighten children. Yet several longtime inhabitants have confirmed that the agreement was real, binding, and still in effect, even if many had forgotten it. The agreement outlined restrictions surrounding certain land rights, trade privileges, and inheritance claims, all originating from an unresolved conflict between two families whose rivalry once threatened to break the town apart. While many assumed the tension had faded with time, this latest incident suggests that the undercurrent of division had never fully disappeared. Investigators believe the woman had knowledge of these lingering tensions and may have understood the significance of the rancher's actions more clearly than anyone else present. In statements gathered from community members, observers described her demeanor as steady, composed, and distinctly aware of the weight her words carried. Her whisper, though quiet, reportedly provoked a visible shift in the rancher's expression, one that some described as recognition, others as fear, and still others as a realization that he had crossed a line he never intended to approach. The rancher's subsequent silence, followed by a measured yet unmistakably shaken response, has fueled growing speculation about his direct ties to the long-forgotten agreement. Multiple eyewitnesses assert that the rancher left the saloon shortly after the exchange, abandoning his usual confident stride, and instead moving with the kind of deliberate restraint that suggested he was wrestling with a decision he had hoped to avoid. Those who know him well have stated that he is not a man easily unsettled, but the events of that evening clearly affected him in a way that few had ever seen. His departure was followed by a sudden hush among the townspeople, who appeared uncertain whether they had just witnessed the resurfacing of an old conflict or the beginning of an entirely new one. That reports filed by local officials indicate that the rancher returned to his property several miles outside town and remained isolated for hours. Sources close to him say he spent that time reviewing old documents, maps, and records, possibly searching for confirmation of the agreement the woman referenced or attempting to assess how deeply the situation might implicate him. It is not yet known whether he found the answers he sought, but what is clear is that by the time he rode back into town the next morning, he was no longer the same man who had walked away from the saloon. Witnesses described him as resolved, guarded, and carrying an intensity that immediately signaled that a turning point had been reached. Unconfirmed reports reveal that he did not attempt to deny the woman's warning nor dismiss its significance. Instead, he began quietly visiting individuals who were believed to be connected to the original dispute, including descendants of the families involved in the long-standing agreement. His visits were brief but purposeful, and though those he met with have not disclosed the content of their conversations, several have hinted that the rancher brought forth information that could potentially alter the historical understanding of the event that shaped the town decades earlier. Others have suggested that the rancher uncovered evidence proving that certain decisions made by previous leaders were based on manipulation, withheld information, or breaches of trust. While officials have not yet confirmed these claims, they have acknowledged that the rancher submitted a sealed report outlining his findings to the town council shortly before noon. The report is currently under review, and council members have postponed regular proceedings to prioritize its contents. Early statements from council representatives described the information as unexpectedly complex and significant enough to require careful consideration, leading many to believe that the rancher's discovery may indeed hold the power to reshape the town's legal and historical foundation. Meanwhile, public reaction has grown increasingly intense. News of the whispered warning has spread far beyond the saloon and into nearly every household, prompting discussions, debates, and varying interpretations of what the incident represents. Some residents have praised the woman for her courage, describing her intervention as timely and necessary, especially if the rancher's actions inadvertently risked violating an agreement that protected vulnerable members of the community. Others, however, worry that her words, though important, may ignite tensions that had long been buried and potentially divide neighbors who have lived peacefully side by side for years. Local leaders have urged residents to remain calm and avoid jumping to conclusions, emphasizing that the council will release an official statement as soon as their review is complete. They have also advised against speculation that could inflame unrest, reminding the public that the rancher has not been accused of any wrongdoing and may, in fact, be working to prevent a long-standing dispute from resurfacing. Nevertheless, the atmosphere in town remains charged, with crowds gathering in public spaces, trading theories, and anxiously awaiting further information. The woman at the center of the controversy has remained largely out of sight since the incident, though several individuals close to her have confirmed that she stands by her warning. They describe her as someone deeply knowledgeable about the town's history, particularly its lesser-known conflicts and agreements. It is believed she anticipated that speaking the forbidden words would have consequences, but that she viewed the risk as necessary to prevent a more dangerous outcome. Her current whereabouts are being withheld for privacy and safety, though she is expected to provide a statement once council proceedings conclude. As more details surface, it is becoming clear that the whispered phrase carried far more than a personal reminder. It served as the spark that forced unresolved matters into the open. Whether this revelation ultimately protects the town or fractures it may depend on the decisions made in the coming days. For now, however, the community waits, uncertain yet undeniably aware that life in the settlement has irrevocably changed. The town of Red Hollow had always been a place where everyone believed they understood the lines that must not be crossed. Generations had lived by unspoken agreements, traditions older than the cracked wooden beams of the saloon, and rules enforced not by law but by the stern weight of shared history. When Clara whispered those three trembling words, "That is forbidden," the rancher, Samuel Hale, felt the full pressure of those centuries bearing down on him. Yet, for the first time in his life, he refused to step back. Her voice had not been angry. It had not even been afraid in the way one fears danger. It was a different fear entirely. Fear of change, fear of consequences, fear of the truth threatening to unravel everything she had spent her life holding together. She had whispered the words like a plea, like a warning, like she hoped he would listen. But Samuel had already made a choice the moment he saw the book in her hands. That book had been passed secretly through families, its ink nearly faded, containing stories of the first settlers who built Red Hollow on land they were told they would never own. Samuel recognized its importance instantly. It wasn't just history. It was proof that the land deeds the powerful Sutton family claimed were fraudulent. Proof that the ranchers who had been pushed aside and robbed for decades had a right to reclaim what was theirs. But Clara Sutton, daughter of the very family that controlled everything, had been raised to protect that secret at all costs, even if it meant living as a prisoner in her own lineage. She wasn't the villain. She wasn't even complicit. She was simply caught between the truth and her family's legacy. That was why her whisper cut so sharply through the dusty air of the old archive room. She hadn't said, "You can't." She hadn't said, "You must not." She had said, "That is forbidden," because she knew exactly what would happen if Samuel revealed what he now held in his calloused hands. The Suttons would strike back. The ranchers would revolt. The town would divide. And Samuel would become a target. He knew it. She knew it. And still, he met her gaze with an unshaken steadiness. He didn't flinch. He didn't drop the book. He didn't soften his stance like she desperately hoped he might in that moment. He simply said, carefully, firmly, "Then it's time someone finally breaks the rules." Clara's breath caught, and Samuel watched her fingers anxiously twist the hem of her blouse as though she were trying to hold herself together. She looked like someone who had lived her whole life being told exactly where she could stand, what she could say, and what she must never even think. He wondered how many times she had been scolded for asking questions, how often she had been discouraged from stepping beyond the boundaries her father drew. She had grown up in luxury, yes, but luxury in a cage was still captivity. "Sam," she whispered, using his name in a softer tone than he had ever heard from her. "If you show that to the town, it won't just be my father who comes after you. It will be the council, the banks, the families, everyone who has something to lose. They'll bury you before they let this come out." "And how long has your family been burying everyone else's truth?" Samuel replied, not with anger, but with a quiet, devastating clarity. Clara shut her eyes because she couldn't deny it. The Sutton fortune didn't come from hard work. It came from manipulation, from land seizures disguised as legal agreements, from controlling Red Hollow's economy so thoroughly that no family could challenge their rule. She knew this in her bones. She had always known. But knowing something and witnessing the possibility of overthrowing it were two very different worlds. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched Samuel turn the pages, reading in silence the testimony of those who came before them. The writing was shaky but unwavering. Stories of settlers who were forced off land they had cleared, ranchers who mysteriously disappeared after refusing to sign skewed contracts, families who fled in the night to escape Sutton retaliation. It was the hidden history of Red Hollow, the one the Suttons had sworn no one would ever see again. Finally, Clara spoke again, her voice barely audible. "What do you want to do with it?" Samuel looked up at her with a calmness that unsettled her more than any anger ever could. "Tell the truth." Those 3 words terrified her, not because of the truth itself, but because of the storm it would unleash. The Suttons had built their kingdom on silence, and silence had always worked. But Samuel Hale was not a silent man. He never had been. He had always stood up for people when ranch hands were underpaid, when farmers lost livestock due to the Suttons' water restrictions, when families were evicted. He had a reputation for being the one man in Red Hollow who could not be bought or intimidated. And now, with that book in his hands, he had become the one man capable of ending the Sutton dynasty entirely. Clara felt something shift deep inside her, a mixture of admiration, fear, and a painful ache she refused to name. "Sam, if you do this, you'll change everything." "That's the point," he answered. "But you'll also put a target on your back. Someone has to. And what about the people who will get hurt?" she pressed, her voice cracking. "This town isn't ready for this. My father isn't just going to sit quietly. He'll fight you. He'll twist the truth. He'll make you look like a criminal. He'll even—" She stopped herself, realizing what she was about to reveal. Samuel waited, his eyes narrowed slightly. "He'll what?" Clara swallowed, her throat tight. "He'll do what he always does when someone threatens him. And Sam, he's done it before." Tears welled in her eyes as the weight of the unspoken past pressed heavily between them. Samuel's jaw clenched. The more she revealed, the more he understood that the Sutton legacy wasn't just built on corruption. It was built on fear, intimidation, and violence. The kind of violence no one dared talk about. He stepped closer, slowly, like he feared startling her. "What did he do, Clara?" She looked away, trembling. "What he always does," she whispered. "He makes people disappear." Samuel exhaled sharply but silently. He wasn't naive. He had suspected the Suttons were capable of something ruthless, but hearing Clara confirm it, hearing the quiver in her voice as she did, ignited a fury in him that he struggled to contain. The first reports that reached the town paper described the incident only as a disturbance on the north side of Silt Creek. But by the time the sheriff's office released its preliminary statement, residents had already begun whispering that something far stranger had taken place. Those who lived closest to the old Everett Ranch claimed they heard shouting just after sundown and a woman's voice saying something that sent a shiver even through seasoned ranch hands. "That is forbidden," she had whispered, words delicate enough to be carried by the wind, yet heavy enough to unsettle every man who heard them. According to early accounts, the rancher who stood before her froze like he had been struck, and whatever passed between them in that moment was powerful enough that even those observing from a distance felt the air changed. Did Tio understand why those words shook an entire town? One had to know who the rancher was. Cole Anders wasn't simply a cattleman. He was the man families called when a fence-line dispute threatened to pull neighbors apart. The one who could break up a bar fight without raising his voice. To outsiders, he seemed unmovable, solid as the land itself. Yet those who knew him a little better understood that the calm he carried came from long-earned scars. For years he had lived quietly on the outskirts, working his land and avoiding the kind of drama that turned men bitter. So when the story spread that he had been involved in an exchange intense enough to shake him, people paid attention. The woman at the center of it all was a newcomer, though not an unfamiliar one. Travelers along the frontier line often passed through Silt Creek, but she wasn't a traveler. She was the kind of woman who arrived in silence, with no wagon, no escort, and no explanation. Her clothes were plain, her eyes sharp, and her demeanor guarded. Yet she carried herself with a quiet determination that suggested she had lived through storms she didn't talk about. Some said she looked like someone who had spent years keeping secrets locked away, and perhaps that was why the townsfolk kept a respectful distance. She never asked for help, never caused trouble, and never lingered where voices rose. No one even knew her real name at first. She introduced herself only as Mara. The only thing the town knew for certain was that Mara had asked to work temporarily at the Everett Ranch, helping repair the storm-damaged barns. It was honest labor, the kind ranchers rarely turned down, but the arrangement sparked curiosity. Outsiders didn't typically seek work that close to the hills, not unless they needed money desperately, or were hiding from someone or something they didn't dare mention. The sheriff's office made a brief inquiry, but finding nothing suspicious, allowed it to pass. Ranchers had always taken in wanderers, and wanderers had always moved on. But Mara didn't behave like someone who intended to move on quickly, and the more she kept to herself, the more attention she unwittingly drew. The moment that eventually made headlines began as a routine end-of-day conversation. Cole had approached Mara to tell her the weather was shifting, and it was best to call it quits for the evening. A storm was gathering over the ridge, painting the sky a bruised purple. Workers knew better than to ignore that kind of omen. Lightning traveled fast across the plains, and the last thing anyone wanted was to be caught holding metal tools beneath the sky ready to split open. But when he reached her, she didn't respond the way he expected. Instead of agreeing or offering polite acknowledgement, she stepped back and told him, with a voice barely above a whisper, "That is forbidden." The rancher stopped cold. Cole was not a man easily rattled, yet the certainty in her tone hit him with a force he didn't immediately understand. Witnesses later said it was as though she wasn't speaking to him alone, but issuing a warning to something bigger than either of them. She wasn't frightened. She was resolute, like someone following a rule etched deep into her bones. And it wasn't simply the word forbidden that unsettled him. It was the way she said it, like a sacred truth she had sworn never to break. Rumors emerged quickly. Some speculated she belonged to a religious sect with unusual customs. Others muttered that she came from a family bound by ancient superstitions or tribal laws. A few even whispered that she carried stories from the mountains, tales of spirits, and old rituals most folks only heard around campfires. But those who saw her expression that evening insisted her warning wasn't rooted in fear or folklore. It was something else, something more personal, as if the act she refused to commit violated a rule she believed her life depended on upholding. Cole tried to respond calmly, but the moment his voice softened, something shifted between them. Observers swore the rancher's normally steady tone faltered for the briefest second, as though he realized he was stepping into a place where logic didn't apply. And instead of walking away, he asked gently, "What do you mean?" That single question marked the turning point. The tension between them grew thick enough to feel, and the storm clouds overhead deepened as if echoing the weight of what passed between them. What no one knew at the time was that Mara had been wrestling with her own fears long before the sun began to set. She had come to the ranch not because she merely needed work, but because she was trying to escape something she refused to name. The lines beneath her eyes told of sleepless nights, and the rigid way she held herself hinted at a life where running had become a habit. The Everett Ranch had seemed quiet, peaceful, untouched by the kind of chaos that haunted her. But Cole's kindness and the unintentional softness in his voice triggered memories she wasn't ready to face. When she whispered those words, they weren't simply a refusal, they were a confession. That is forbidden wasn't a dramatic statement. It was an anchor to rules she had lived by for far too long. Rules that kept her safe. Rules that dictated what she could reveal, whom she could trust, and which lines could not be crossed without consequence. Cole had unknowingly asked her to cross one dot, and that was why the rancher's reaction became the talk of the town. Instead of shrugging off her refusal or demanding an explanation, he listened, really listened. And seeing him listening, seeing his expression shift with an understanding deeper than words, was what startled those who watched from afar. Because Cole Anders wasn't a man who involved himself in other people's secrets. Yet that evening, he didn't walk away. He stepped closer, drawn not by curiosity, but by something no one could name, by sundown. After the first flash of lightning cut across the sky, the caretakers reported seeing Cole and Mara still standing near the half-mended barn. No yelling, no threats, just tension thick enough to unsteady the hands of even the toughest ranch hands nearby. It was only later, when the sheriff's office officially recorded witness statements, that the town realized the truth. Those simple words, softly spoken, almost swallowed by the wind, had shaken Silk Creek because they broke something open inside the rancher that no one thought could be touched. The first reports began circulating early Monday morning, long before most residents of Red Creek finished their coffee or stepped outside to feed livestock. It started with a rumor whispered in the general store, passed along the diner counter, and repeated with increasing urgency as it traveled from porch to porch. People said something had happened out at Miller's Ridge, not a storm, not an accident, but something involving Calder Hayes, a man who rarely gave the town anything to gossip about. What caught everyone's attention wasn't just his name, but the mysterious woman who was said to have looked him dead in the eye and whispered the words that would soon echo across the entire region. That is forbidden. At first, the claims sounded like one of those strange tales locals sometimes invented to break the monotony of ranch life. But when a local deputy confirmed that an incident had indeed occurred, curiosity sharpened into concern, and concern quickly evolved into full-blown speculation. Red Creek, usually a town that thrived on slow days and predictable rhythms, suddenly pulsed with questions no one had answers to. The woman at the center of the growing storm had arrived in Red Creek just after dawn 2 days earlier. Several residents recalled seeing her at the edge of town, moving with a cautious, almost hunted gait. She kept her head down, her clothes dusty, and her arms wrapped tightly around herself as though bracing for a blow. No one knew her name then, and most people assumed she was passing through like many others who drifted between small western towns. Yet it was clear from the start that she wasn't just traveling, she was fleeing. One store clerk remembered her asking for water with a shaky voice, glancing repeatedly over her shoulder as if expecting someone to burst through the door at any second. Fear clung to her like a second skin, though she tried, unsuccessfully, to hide it. What no one knew at the time was that she had spent the previous night sheltering inside the abandoned meeting hall near Miller's Ridge. The structure had once served as a gathering place for local ranchers before newer buildings replaced it, and it had slowly decayed into neglect. Dust coated the long wooden benches, Broken glass scattered across the floor. A rusted lantern still hung from a beam, swaying whenever the wind crept through the cracks. It was there, among the shadows and discarded relics of town history, that the woman hid. And it was there that she encountered Calder Hayes. Calder was not the type to wander into abandoned buildings without reason. Though known for his independence, he respected the quiet of rural spaces and rarely intruded anywhere he wasn't needed. But on that particular morning, he had been searching for a missing calf believed to have wandered toward the ridge. When he approached the old meeting hall, he noticed the door, normally swollen shut from years of disuse, standing slightly open. Something about the sight bothered him. He dismounted his horse, pushed the door wider, and stepped inside. That decision would turn into the spark that lit the fire now sweeping through Red Creek. Eyewitnesses, most of whom heard the events secondhand through the deputy's recounting, said the woman reacted instantly. The moment she sensed someone entering the building, she leapt from behind a bench and grabbed Calder's wrist with surprising force. Her voice, strained and breathless, carried a mixture of fear and resolve that chilled even the deputy retelling the story. "Don't touch that," she told Calder, her eyes wide with something far deeper than panic. "That is forbidden." The words were sharp, quiet, and urgent, as though she feared the wind itself might carry them to the wrong ears. The question of what that referred to quickly became the center of speculation. Some residents claimed it was a weapon. Others whispered that it was a piece of evidence tied to a crime. A few insisted it had something to do with land rights, an issue that had sparked conflict in the region decades earlier. But the most compelling theories came from those who claimed the woman had been protecting an object wrapped in cloth, something she kept close to her body at all times. The deputy refused to confirm any details, which only added fuel to the growing fire of town speculation. Calder, for his part, was described as surprisingly gentle in his reaction. Known for his steady demeanor and unshakable calm, he did not pull away or demand answers. Instead, he listened. He assessed the fear in her voice, the tremor in her grip, and the exhaustion etched into her face. Those who knew Calder well said he had a knack for knowing when a person was genuinely in danger versus when they were creating drama. And in that moment, he understood instinctively that whoever this woman was, she wasn't playing a role or seeking attention. She was running for her life. As the morning unfolded, one fact became impossible to ignore. The woman was not merely frightened, she was being pursued. Tracks found near the ridge suggested at least 2 riders had passed through during the night, and the direction of the prints indicated they were searching for someone rather than traveling through. Residents who had seen strange men in town earlier that week began connecting dots they previously hadn't thought twice about. Something, or someone, had disrupted the equilibrium of Red Creek. The story gained momentum when the deputy quietly visited the Hayes Ranch later that afternoon. He stayed long enough for neighbors to notice, and by evening, the entire town knew that Calder had taken the woman under his protection. This was significant. Calder was not a man who involved himself in disputes, especially those tied to outside trouble. If he had chosen to protect her, then her situation was far more serious than anyone originally assumed. As rumors multiplied, a subtle tension settled over Red Creek. People began locking doors they normally left open. A few ranchers reported seeing unfamiliar riders watching from hilltops. By nightfall, the town felt unsettled, as though holding its breath, waiting for something larger to unfold. And it all traced back to one whispered warning inside a forgotten building. "That is forbidden."